I'm very happy to be here and to have the chance to speak about my recent research and the atlasing or mapping the religious movement of Hasidism. You get a flyer about the atlas. The most important information is that with the code it is 30% cheaper. So please feel encouraged to consider it. My presentation, I would actually like to start in a reverse order. Namely, instead of doing the presentation and then Q&As, I would start with asking myself the question that you will ask me anyway, and I will provide the answer to this question. Namely, the question is, what's so important about Hasidism to study? Why do you study Hasidism? And some people put it in a less polite language, saying, why you, Paul, study Hasidism? What's so interesting to you about this phenomenon? So I answer it in two essential responses, which I believe the first one speaks to you. I researched it for the same reasons why you came here. Namely, we recognize the importance of this. And I think it is more me than many other people to recognize it, because Hasidism is the biggest religious movement to emerge ever in Polish lands, of any religious movements, not only Jewish. So if we think about it, it's obviously we're being studied in Poland and in Polish context. And second off, even for those who might not know what Hasidism is the most successful religious movement of all modern Jewish religious movements to shape the popular image of what Judaism and Jewishness really is. If you ask a person who has no clue about Hasidism, Hasid, things Jewish, what is a real Jew, you will possibly hear a response: this is this strange man in a fur hat walking above PQE from Williamsburg to Manhattan, right? Or something there. And this will be the Hasid. This will be the image of a Hasidic figure. And it translates into many areas. One of those, for example, when in one of the circus shows in Moscow, the circus was showing the presentation entitled Nations of the World, and there were different pieces of the show to represent different nationalities. You can easily guess that for the Jewish nation, these were men and apes dressed in Hasidic dress. And if you think this can happen only in Russia, then I advise you to go to Orlando, Florida, Disney World, where you have the same exhibition, Nations of the World. And there you have also Israel, the state of Israel. And what do you have there? You have there Hasidic couple under chuppah. If you consider that Hasidim are tiny minority of Israel society and contested by the vast majority of Hasidim, and if you take them as representation of average Israeli, of the most typical Israeli, then you understand the success of Hasidism in conquering public imagination of what Jewishness really is. The most striking example comes from Poland, and it has spatial aspect to this, which is why I bring it here to introduce my lecture on mapping Hasidism. As you might know, Lublin was important site of Jewish scholarship, very important place for Jewish life until the Holocaust, when all of Jews were killed, mostly in death camp of Bełżec, and the Jewish district was totally erased. All the buildings were pulled down. After the Holocaust, in the area, there was a square built. That all buildings were not recreated. They were usually poor buildings of the Jewish district, so nothing was recreated. There is the area of this elliptic square on the ground which used to be, before Second World War, the Jewish district there, very close to the old town and the castle of Lublin. Several years ago, a Polish literary critic suggested that in order to understand Lublin, you cannot just walk the streets of the town and live there. You need to rise above the ground. 50 meters might be enough, just above where we see it from. And if you look down on the square, you understand this is not a square. This is an eye. This is the eye of the tzaddik, Hasidism in Lublin, the seer of Lublin, a famous tzaddik from Lublin, who died 1815, who was famous for seeing with his eye things from one end of the world to another thing of the world. That was his title, Hasidism, the seer. And he says, this is the eye of tzaddik that looks at Lublin, and you can understand this town only if you realize the central importance of this Hasidic motive. When, several years ago, city of Lublin was preparing for 700 years of municipal laws, they announced the competition for the visual sign of the city. And you guess who won? A local Lublin artist who suggested the city, it will be now, the emblem of the city will be the eye of the tzaddik. This is officially known emblem of the city of Lublin, the eye of the tzaddik, and recognized as such. And you can today find it all over Lublin, for example, on buses, on bus tickets, on every municipal announcement, on every poster in town, on municipal building, all over Lublin, you have the eye of the tzaddik. The tzaddik, the Hasidic leader, who is the symbol of Lublin. Not of Jewish Lublin only, of all 700 years of the city of Lublin. And mind you, Lublin, for the most time in their history, had the right, the non-tolerantist Judaism, not to tolerate Jews within the city walls. Now, we have a Hasidic leader becoming the symbol of the town. I think you cannot imagine greater success for Hasidism to conquer public imagination of what is really important. So this is my starting point. But together with this, I say Hasidism is the topic of possibly the biggest stereotypes and misunderstandings of what it really is. For many reasons, how contested it is, stereotypes and misperceptions ranging from factual mistakes to conceptual issues inform our view on this topic. One of those factual mistakes is the portrait on the left, the famous portrait of the founder of Hasidism, Baal Shem Tov. The only problem is this is not Baal Shem Tov. This is the portrait of Baal Shem of London, and not of Baal Shem Tov from Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, roughly speaking the same time. The 2,000 kilometers between the two did not make a difference for many people to realize this is actually so popular image that everybody takes it for an icon of early Hasidism. This is a tiny factual mistake, which is easy to correct, I believe. But the second issue reflects to what Hasidism really is. How we imagine, when we have to discuss, define the nature of Hasidic movement, how we see it, in which categories. Is it a group of Masonic lodge, kind of Masonic lodge people gathering in the vaults to do their secretive, mystical and magical things half a meter above the ground, levitating there and doing things that nobody else can understand? Or what is it? I'm claiming this was not a sectarian movement. We cannot understand Hasidism if we define it in sectarian categories. If you want to know how I'm trying to redefine it, go to another book, Hasidism Key Questions. At the first chapter there is definition. And I'm claiming this is simply a confraternity, Hevra, the way how Hevrot in Eastern Europe were organized at the time. Only if you look at Hasidism that way, we understand how it functions. But those stereotypes, they extend into great many areas of defining Hasidism, and possibly the biggest area of misunderstandings is geography of Hasidism. If there is any geography of Hasidism, is it the a-territorial movement? Many people, actually several scholars, publish programmatic texts saying there is no geography of Hasidism. There is no point in mapping Hasidism at all. Why? Because ideas fly freely. You have a Hasidic leader who is suggesting certain Hasidic ideas, and they are very similar to ideas entertained by another Hasidic leader in Hungary half a century later. What's the geography? You have huge areas between those two. You have no physical connection. Besides, we know about Hasidim who live in one country and are followers of a tzaddik, Hasidic leader, in another country. So there are no boundaries. Hasidism flies freely around all of Eastern Europe, Like in this image, right? Everything is fluid and there's mostly the land of legends and fairy tales. I don't buy it. I believe it needs to be checked. And the simple way to do it is to confront the ideas with realities. And my essential argument here starts with the trivial recognition that Hasidism really is not a movement of ideas. If we think about ideas, this might be true, that ideas entertained by one leader and another leader very far are close, while people living close to each other might have very, very different concepts. But Hasidism, as every other religious phenomenon, is a thing that is performed and experienced. We need to look in other than intellectual categories to understand what people on the ground, thousands of rank and file Hasidim, experience as being Hasidic. The institutions they build, the institutions that gather them around, the affective connection between the Rebbe and the followers, the experiential aspect of belonging to one or another Hasidic group. What are the performances of different Hasidic groups and how it differs, what unifies them? Only if we look on Hasidism this way, we can understand the real structures and what Hasidism really is. So, my first issue with geography of Hasidism was to ask where Hasidim would really pray. What would make them Hasidic? And the essential answer is, you are Hasid if you come to Hasidic shtibel to pray, if you accept Hasidic way of praying, and if you travel once in a while to your Rebbe. So my question is, can we get information about where Hasidim were praying? And believe me or not, I went through more than 700 communal books of, memorial books of Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, and I selected chapters on Hasidism and prayer houses in all those books, and I extracted information on Hasidic prayer houses in all of those East European Jewish communities, in addition to information coming from several other sources that allowed me to build a database of 2,854 Hasidic prayer houses in Eastern Europe between 1900 and 1939. And we have this map here. Actually, this is a series of maps showing them. Here, I'm showing it for a very simple reason, that in one of the maps, I colored every shtibel, the one dot is one shtibel, I colored them according to the allegiance of the shtibel, right? If the shtibel claims allegiance to the Rebbe living in central Poland, the 19th century Kingdom of Poland, or Congress of Poland, it is yellow. If the shtibel claims allegiance to the Rebbe living in Galicia, it is red. If the shtibel claims allegiance to a Rebbe living in Ukraine, it is blue. And if it claims allegiance to a Rebbe living in Lithuania or Belarus, it is light blue, which is here another color. I don't know why the color are not something strange. Right? You will see in Atlas the colors are somehow different, nicer. And what comes out of this map? Obviously, there are several. Say, how can I do it? Galician Sztibla in central Poland, right? You have some Ukrainian Sztibla in central Poland. You have some Polish Sztibla in Ukraine. But 90 to 95% of Galician Sztibla claims allegiance to Galician Rebbe. 90 to 95% of Sztibla in Poland claim allegiance to the Polish Rebbe. And the same goes for Ukraine and Belarus. In other words, and the political boundaries, even if they were not keeping the Hasidic thought and ideas from flying across the borders, they did keep Hasidim within political entities of 19th century Eastern Europe. As you can see here, the Polish Hasidim would go to Polish Rebbe, Galician Hasidim would go to Galician Rebbe's, and on. And what is even more important in this map, this is the map, as I was saying, of Stiblach between 1900 and 1939. But the vast majority of information comes from the interwar period, 1918, 1939. At that time, the boundary between Galicia and Central Poland, all Central Poland and Ukraine and Belarus did not exist. There were no boundaries there. This was a part of the same Second Polish Republic. But the so-called phantom borders remained. The boundaries informed the Hasidism in the 19th century, and they stayed intact throughout the interwar period, with no real changes. And actually, when the Hasidim were migrating to the New Earth, and they settled, it should be gray, anyway, and they settled in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. As you can see here, the Hungarian and Galician Hasidim would settle in the eastern part of Lower East Side, and Polish and Russian Hasidim would settle in the western part of Lower East Side, and they would not mingle. Their prayer houses were separate. The boundaries, the mental boundaries were still there in this new world, but the political divisions were still there. So this is very strong proof of how those categories informed Hasidism. But the claims goes further. If you ask contemporary Hasidim about geographical categories into which they divide Hasidic world, they will give you 19th century political categories, and they will divide Hasidic groups according their 19th century divisions. Galicia does not exist as political entity from 1918. It's not ethnic, it's not political, it is nothing, but still Galician Hasidism is distinctly different than Polish Hasidism, or Hungarian Hasidism, or Ukrainian Hasidism. Ukrainian will be part of Russian, and Russian and Ukrainian, those will be mixed. But Galician and Polish will be never mixed, because these are distinct categories. In other words, I'm claiming here that in order to understand, even if geography Hasidism had not existed, it would have been a very important category to understand contemporary Hasidism, how Hasidim imagine themselves today. And this map is showing. This is from chapter 9, which I entitled There and Back Again, taken from Hobbit, you might recall, because this is about how Hasidim return physically, but even more so mentally, from where they are today to Eastern Europe, and how they re-envision they're connected to the land of the origins. And also, if we are to know what kind of hat it is, Biber hat, you say, right? Biber hat, okay. But how do we know this is Galician? And we know this is Galician, this is Silesia actually, by shape. And this is the strongest explanation of the geographical category. Because it means that all groups that define themselves Galician will use Galician hats. Not only to use this category in their external discussion, but also to display geographical distinctions. Mind you, they all live on the same street in Jerusalem or Bnei Brak or Williamsburg, but one are Galician, another is Polish, and they are displaying these differences, 19th century political distinctions, by the way how they dress today. So I believe that with this short presentation, I defended the argument that there is such a thing as geography of Hasidism, and for this reason, the atlas is a legitimate enterprise. And with this, I would like to go into several questions, if possible, to show you how I build the concept of the atlas. Starting with using digital humanities. Digital humanities, I think, is the central development of last 25 years of humanities, which radically changed the way we do much of research in humanities today. And I think this has strong implication for research like this one that can combine qualitative and quantitative research. As I was mentioning with the Stiblach, this was simply a database of nearly 3,000 Stiblach that I managed to gather from a variety of sources. If we want to know a very basic issue of how the influence of the Rebbe is structured, right? In other words, how to confront the stereotype of the heavenly Rebbe and the Ranenfall Hasidim with very little contact, right? Looking up to him and having no real interaction. How is it structured? What is it, right? So I say, let's see what kind of patterns we can observe in Hasidic followers coming to the Hasidic court. Do we have a possibility of mapping the sphere of influence of a Hasidic court? The place that would gather Hasidim coming to the Kvitler. And fortunately, we do. Of many Hasidic Rebbes, of thousands of Hasidic Rebbes, it was only one who was actually not a Hasidic Rebbe, who was gathering petitions brought to him by the petitioners, by the pilgrims coming. He was kind of Yeka, he was living in Germany, and that might be the reason that he was behaving differently than an average East European tzaddik. He was actually, I was saying he was non-Hasidic, and at some stage, Eliyahu Gutmacher, actually in one of Hebrew journals, Maskilic journals, he announced, I think it was 1869, that he is not a Hasidic Rebbe, and he asked not to come to him with petitions and requests for miracles, which brought him even bigger trunks of petitioners because he was not only tzaddik but also such a modest one. So this is kind of natural phenomenon, right? He was gathering them. I think actually that he was destroying those kvitlet on a yearly basis, every year. He did not manage to destroy the last year collection because he died, last year of his life, 1873 to 1874. And for this year alone, we have 7,000 kvitler. The beauty of the kvittel is a small petition with a request what people come for. And the beauty of those texts is that I did not have to read all 7,000 of them. It was enough to read the first line only. Because the first line gives you location where the petitioner is coming from. And by this, I was able, Ozorkuf there. So, you know, once I read this one, I put one stroke on Ozorkuf. When I read this one, I put a second stroke on Ozorkuf. So after reading the 7,000 of them, I was able to build a database of all localities from which somebody came to place request to the court of Eliyahu Gutmacher. Confronted with information on the number of Jewish families living in those localities, it came to the map of this type. The size of the bubble is the size of the Jewish community. The color is the ratio of families, percentage of families bringing petition to the Rebbe. In other words, red is high and green is low, like in physical math, right? So if this is deep green, it means that the number of, even if the community is large, deep green means that the number of people from this community bringing kvittel was very low, percentage-wise. While small communities, like up there at the very, very top, those large communities, even if it is small, it means that it was more than 60% of Jews from this community. Actually, this one, the biggest one, was 80% of families from this community bringing the kvittel to the Rebbe. And from this, if we put it on the map, and we see where Grodzisk is up there, we have three very interesting patterns of the map of influence of the single Hasidic court, or any Hasidic court, I imagine. First off, it is so-called distance decay effect. The kind of obvious phenomenon. The farther, the more difficult to get. If something is close, it is easy to come. If you need to go for a long time, if it's a long way, so the biggest concentration of red and deep yellow is close to Grodzisk. This map is not concentrical because Guttmacher is living in Germany. There are no Hasidim in Germany. All the Hasidim are coming from Eastern Europe, right? So only within boundaries of Galicia and Central Poland, there are the bubbles, right? But in this territory, the closest, you see the circles, each circle is 50 miles, right? So within the first circle, you have nothing because it's still Germany. The second circle has the biggest concentration of the very red and orange bubbles, and on and on. And then if it goes farther, it is green. I would say there's nothing surprising about it, about this pattern. But it's still better to know than to expect, so I think to confirm this information is important. But this map is, this general pattern is distracted by two other phenomena. One of them is very interesting. If you look on this, there on the top, this one, Lubicz, it is, as I was saying, 80%, huge number of families coming there, and it's not so close. It is, as you see, more than 100 miles. Why? For very simple reason. You see this reason with this narrow line coming out there, and then going this way, and along this line, you have another big number of communities with big red bubbles, or this line going here, or this line going, down there and there, and there, and there. This is very simple railroads. Obviously, the distance is relative. It's not the distance, the say effect does not work as a distance as such. It works as a distance in categories of time, money, effort, and the danger of traveling, right? With train, which might be not the cheapest way there, but still very fast and very safe, it was much easier to get to the place than with other ways of transportation. In other words, what we have here, it is not space and spirit, but steel and spirit as connected. You see how development of, how ascent of modernity, the railroad as emblem of 19th century modernity is bringing the new patterns of spiritual life for people in those communities, because it allows them to communicate easier with this rebel than with others, right? So that's the second. And the third one, I think it's very interesting, if you look at places like this one, Okuniew, or this one, which is very far, this is not a big community, but still a mid-sized community in eastern Poland with big number of petitioners coming from here to Grodzisk. What it is? It's more than 200 miles. 300 kilometers to go to Grodzisk, instead of going 40 kilometers to Ger, to the famous Rebbe of Ger, or going 20 kilometers to well-known Rebbe of Parysów, living very close from there. Why would they take it? I believe this is a phenomenon that I would like to call a chain miracle. Like train migration, you know, train migration is the phenomenon that a person who would emigrate, say, from Lublin to United States and would settle in Tucson would bring all other Lubliners to Tucson, because that would be the basis for others to help them, right? So this is known as train migration, a very typical basic pattern of migrating, and this I call chain miracle. If somebody from Okuniew went to Grodzisk and returned home successfully, and I leave it to you whether it was objectively successfully or subjectively, whether the miracle really happened or it was a different way, whatever. He comes back and he says, miracle happened, I'm healthy, see, I'm cured. So what's the outcome for the community? Obviously they want to go the same way, because they believe he is good. Maybe not he's the best Rebbe in the world, but he's good for curing this kind of illnesses, or helping us with parnose, with the income. If you have no income and you need to have it, go to Grodziska Rebbe, because he will help you. And this is actually what's happening in those communities. Getting back to digital humanities. 7,000 records for this database might be for people in computer science a laughing stock. They say this is big data, this is nothing. But even with a small number of 7,000 information, the issue is that without digital humanities, it was impossible to visualize the patterns emerging from this number of data. You could read them. I know geography of Eastern Europe pretty well. I knew the places on my list, and I could never see patterns emerging from this database if not made by the simple click on the software of GIS, Geographic Information Systems, that allow us to reverse the process of cartography as it used to be. Traditional cartography had the map as the end result of research. After very extensive gathering of information, conceptual work, a geographer or historian with cartographer would sit together and make the map, which was expression of how they understand and interpret the data. Today, we start with a map. We enter big number of data into the database. We do the click. Actually, we do the number of clicks. We do the number of maps by the number of categories we entered into the database. And we have a number of maps that are showing us patterns we wouldn't have seen if not with these essential tools. And from these maps, we come to interpret it further. We see the patterns that were not visible before. And I think this is the beauty of digital humanities, and this is the beauty of mapping and using big data. And especially for phenomena like Hasidism, that we like to think in intellectual categories, which deprive them of their reality, of the experiential aspect, of affective aspects, of their rootedness in space and social and cultural context of Eastern Europe or contemporary United States, Canada, Israel. It's very important that we come to see how much new issues that we had no chance to see before, we can see with quantitative research allowed by digital humanities. And I think this is what you get from those now. Returning to the issue of who is the rebel, and the database I was mentioning, the Shtibel, right? I was referring already to counting them briefly. So you know the database I gathered 2,854 of them. This is not completely of Shtibel, obviously, but I have some points of reference which allow me to estimate that this is roughly 70% of all the Shtibel of Eastern Europe in existence at the time, which is very good representative collection, which allows us, unfortunately, not to see the overall pictures because the source basis is incomparable between areas. We have very good information on central Poland and western Galicia, and very weak information on eastern Belarus, for example. So we cannot compare the numbers, right? But we can compare patterns. And with those patterns, first of all, we see hierarchy of Hasidic groups. Very basic information. Which groups are strong, which are mid-sized, and which were weak, simply, and which were dominating in which areas. So if the map in the middle disappeared, plus refer to the atlas, it is there, right? So the pie charts, left top, this is for Kingdom of Poland or Central Poland. We have very simple information that 22% of all the Sztyblach in Central Poland claim allegiance to Ger. They were Ger Sztyblach. Second one is Alexander, 12%. Okay, you might say, then we understand the hierarchy and so what. But if you know history of Hasidism in Poland and you know that for late 19th and all of 20th century, it was marked by the very important conflict between Ger and Alexander, then you understand this is not a conflict of ideas. This is even not a conflict of personalities of Hasidic leaders. This is a structural conflict of two dominating groups fighting for recognition and for hegemony in this territory. They are simply fighting for power. And then you understand that issues of ideology, how the rabbis were giving explanation to how they differ between Ger and Alexander, are only secondary to what is their political activity. Involvement of Ger Rebbe in Agudas Israel, and involvement of Alexander Rebbe in anything that is not Agudas Israel, politically, right? So you understand the totally different level, what is happening within Hasidic world, if you know those hierarchies. And you can go the same way farther down. For example, from this you learn that the biggest group in Galicia is Beus, which is 14%, followed by Czortków, Sadagura, and Hushatin. But you see, even if colors are not right, the Czortków, Alexander, Sadagura, and Hushatin are the same color here, which marks they are from the same dynasty. There are 3 branches of the same Sadagura dynasty. So together, they actually make the bigger group than Beus, and their influence overpasses the individual dominance of Beus. And then you look on the map of the Sztibla of Czortków, Sadagura, and Hushatin, and suddenly you see that Hushatin occupies only northeastern belt of Galicia. There are no Sztibla of Hushatin outside of this area. Czortków is located perfectly in the mid-Galicia, okay, and Sadagura is taking place mostly in Bukovina and partly also in Ukrainian territories. So you see how they divide territories among different groups of the same dynasty. This comes out of this. This is another map at which I divided all of Eastern Europe into squares of 35 by 35 kilometers and calculated what is the dominant group in all of them. And then you can have a very interesting information showing you areas of dominance of a variety of groups. But unfortunately, we have no time for this. I've got a note about the time limit. This is not very appealing, maybe, but I want to start with this because also going further with this information, I calculated relation between size of the Hasidic group, the number of Shtiblach, and average distances between the court and the Shtibel. And a regular tendency, obviously, is that the bigger group, the bigger distances there are, right? For some groups, it totally goes out of the scale. It does not follow this regular line, right? And why is it so? In each case, we are able to understand connection between spatial pattern of distribution and ideology of the group. We, in the case of Lubavitcher, we immediately refer to so-called takanot liozna, the regulations from early 19th century in which Rebbe gives instructions how to behave in case of the group that is dispersed in wide territories and difficulties of really close contact to the Rebbe. With big groups also like Ger and Alexander, if we compare them to mid-sized or small groups, we also learn this is not really the difference of success. We cannot say that those groups have smaller number of Shtiblach because they are less successful. I claim they have different model of spatial expansion and different model of interaction between Rebbe and followers. In case of Ger, imagine Ger, huge court of several hundred, 300 Shtiblach in all of central Poland, some of them located 200 kilometers, 100,000 followers in interwar time. An average Hasid coming to see the Rebbe once a year maybe, or maybe even not so, because when he comes there, he's in a crowd of 10,000 followers, or maybe more, and what can he see? He can see a small figurine somewhere very far there, right? If this is not an important person, a rabbi, a very wealthy man, or somebody influential, his personal contact with the Rebbe is mediated through a big crowd. He is proud of belonging to a very powerful group. He's very proud of being member of this strong, all Polish body of the dominating group, but his personal contact with the Rebbe is minimal. On the other extreme, you have Pinchev Rebbe, who is proud, who take pride of knowing every of his Hasidim by name and by all the tzures, all the problems they have in family. And he knows how to address those. Is he less successful? You might say so, but if you look on the district of Pinchów, then you realize that in closest vicinity, for all those Hasidim who can come every week to spend the Shabbat with the Rebbe, in Pinchów area, Pinchów Rebbe has more Shtiblach than Gerer Rebbe. But the influence is limited to a small area. The same goes for famous Bobov. Bobov, which is that time less than 1% of all the Shtiblach. But if you go, even for Galicia, it's only 4% of Galician Shtiblach. But if you go into westernmost part of Galicia, this is the dominant group. And Bobov Rebbe knows all of them very closely, and they come to visit him many times a year. They have different contacts. These are two different models of close charismatic leadership and distant charismatic leadership. And I think it's critically important to understand what comes out of mapping those centers. These are different models of spiritual leadership and not more and less successful models. For remaining 5 minutes, right? The point that we cannot miss is the death of Hasidism in Eastern Europe. And the map of the Holocaust is showing the essential places where it ends, right? And again, this is the place where 80 prominent tzaddikim of this time died during the Holocaust. And as you see very clearly, Auschwitz is the place where Hungarian Hasidism has its end. And Warsaw Ghetto and Treblinka is the place where Polish Hasidism has an end. And you have the less prominent Bełżec, you have ghettos in the east. This map is giving the image of the end of Hasidism in Eastern Europe, but this is the end of chapter 7. Fortunately, there are 2 more chapters. Chapter 8. Somebody called it Death and Resurrection. If it's not ringing the bell of the wrong religious connotation, I like this metaphor, because this is indeed about death and resurrection of Hasidism. Because next chapter starts with this idea of young boys in Mea Shearim, Israel today, and how Hasidism managed to come into prominence in Israeli society, or Jewish society more generally today. The question that I asked to this chapter 8, the central question, is the simple one, because as you possibly noticed, I like simple questions and simple answers. So what's the simplest question you would like to ask about Hasidism today? What will it be? My question would be, how many they are? Regardless whether we are afraid of spread of Hasidism, or we appreciate it, or we are indifferent, the essential question about any phenomenon is to know the size of this, right? What is the size of Hasidism? So my question was, and I was surprised, there's no answer to this question. Sociologists are giving many good reasons not to give this number. And they're really good, I'm serious. But altogether, I believe there are ways to estimate it, and instead of going into census polls, school registers, and political data that has been used so far, I used telephone directories. Every Hasidic group is issuing a telephone, every large and mid-sized Hasidic group is issuing once in a while a telephone directory, which is a telephone directory of this group alone, and not of all of Hasidism or all Jews in the area or whatever, right? So, and these are, with 2 exceptions, these are relatively accurate lists of the membership lists, actually, of those groups. So by gathering 44 of those, I managed to 44 of 130 groups. You might say it's minority, but if you remember that it is 44 biggest and mid-sized groups in Hasidism, this is roughly speaking 90% of Hasidic people worldwide, because according to Pareto distribution, those small groups that have 10 or 20, there are many of the followers, there are many of them, but they don't make a significant percentage of the community, right? So with this, I have roughly speaking 90%, and you might argue that I'm wrong, that it's only 85, or maybe this is 92, but it will not change the picture, the overall picture coming out of this data. Because what we have here is that with the assumption that the data I have is 90%, we come to the number of 129,000 Hasidic households worldwide, which multiplied by 5.5 for an average size of Hasidic family, and those who believe it's too small are wrong, because they think about ultimate size and not average size. Average size is a size of family that has not children yet, or their children left home, and those families that have all children at home at the same time, or that only started bringing children, you know. So average is 5.5 and confirmed by many case studies, sociological research. So if we multiply, we come to a number between 700 and 750,000 Hasidim worldwide today. Compared to the number of core Jewish population, this is 5% only. This is not very high number if you realize that in mid-19th century Eastern Europe, this number in Galicia could be 80% or 70%, right? This is a fraction of this. And even more so, I think it's important, considering that Hasidic population is highly urbanized today and concentrated in localities known as Hasidic enclaves, like Kiryas Joel, New Square, or Williamsburg. Their influence might be high, but highly localized at the same time. They are very influential in areas of big concentration and relatively underrepresented elsewhere. And this is my response to those preaching about the Hilonim versus Dosim war in Israel, about conflict between secular and religious. And you know, Hasidim are still quite insignificant minority within Jewish people. It might change in time. I'm not saying because of high birth rate among them, but it is not reality today. The numbers also, the square is the number of community and the color is ratio. Yellow is 5%. So in United States, Canada, Israel, Australia, the numbers are as they are. 5% average. It does not differ from the world distribution. The only two important countries where it differs is United Kingdom with 10% and Belgium with 30% of Jews being Hasidic, because of one Hasidic community of Antwerp, 1,800 families, and very weak Jewish population of Belgium in general. So this one community makes a third of Jews in Belgium. And this can be broken into individual communities. If you saw a Hasid, he's living in one of those bubbles, either big or small, but this is showing all of the places. That's the distribution. But also, because every telephone directory refers to individual group, I was able not only to get a telephone, home address, and zip code for every Hasidic family, but also to get their affiliation with Hasidic group. So I'm able to divide. As for before Holocaust, I know also today how it breaks in Bnei Brak, for example. 19% of Hasidim are there, in opposition to Vizhnitz Bnei Brak, which is 15%, and on, right? So we can see with the pie chart how those different communities are divided. What is their internal dynamic? And again, this refers to the conflicts, as I was saying about Ger and Alexander. We have exactly the same kind of conflicts between, say, Vizhnitz Bnei Brak of Reb Israel in opposition of Vizhnitz Bnei Brak of Reb Mendel, brothers who are quarreling about a variety of issues, right? So numbers, we can come to numbers. We can come also to numbers of different dynasties. And from those dynasties, I assume that at least some of you are surprised that Chabad Lubavitch is not the dominant group. But it's far below Satmar. Note. Also, we can go into analyzing the smaller numbers. See, this is surprising, right? Compare those two. The number of Satmar Hasidim in the occupied territories, 0.0, 0.0. Why? Obviously, this is the outcome of Satmar anti-Zionist ideology. They don't want to participate in Israeli settlement into occupied territories. While for Chabad, this is visibly not an issue. And for Bratslav, even less so. Right?
So this is what we understand connections between the settlement patterns and the ideological functions that come out of these images. And this can be broken into individual dynasties, as it is there, and it can be broken into residences of individual tzaddikim. So if you want to go for a tish to a rebbe, you buy the map, you buy the atlas, and then you have the map where you can go street by street to every tish. You know what petitions took place there. For Chabad Lubavitch, you can see how the structure of Chabad houses is changing between 1999 and 2016. Sometimes when I had books that were showing kind of diachronic image, right? Two different telephone directories that I was able to compare, I was getting this very interesting diachronic images. But also places of Hasidic pilgrimage today, issues of, I think this is beautiful, set of 5 maps that you will see how settlement of Hasidic leadership is changing in Eastern Europe. 2, 3, 4, 5. And you see the phenomena that I have no time to discuss now. I will be speaking about them tomorrow at Arizona State University. Thank you very much.